The day Elliot Morrow walked into the Hargrove Grand and saw his wife on her knees scrubbing the baseboards of the lobby floor was the day something inside him quietly, irreversibly broke. He almost didn't recognize her. That was the part that would haunt him for years. Not the shock of finding her, but the 3 full seconds where his eyes passed over that woman in the faded gray uniform, kneeling beside a mop bucket near the service corridor, and his brain simply filed her away as staff. Just another employee, invisible the way the wealthy always make the invisible invisible. And then she turned her head slightly to reach behind a marble pillar, and he saw her profile. His briefcase hit the floor. The concierge started toward him. A bellhop glanced over. Elliot didn't notice any of them. He was already moving slowly, because some part of him understood that if he moved too fast, the image would shatter and he'd realize he was wrong. That it wasn't her. That Rebecca was still gone, still somewhere he couldn't reach, still the missing piece of a life he had spent 7 months trying to hold together with both hands. But it was her, Rebecca Morrow, his wife. 34 years old, with her dark hair pulled back under a cloth headband, wearing a uniform 2 sizes too large, on her knees in the lobby of a 4-star hotel in downtown Cincinnati, 4 blocks from the offices of Morrow Capital, where her photograph still sat on his desk. He stopped about 10 feet away, close enough to see that she was thinner than he remembered. Close enough to see the way her shoulders curved inward, like someone who had learned to take up less space. She hadn't seen him yet. Elliot Morrow had built a real estate development firm from the ground up over 12 years. He had negotiated with city councils, managed 8-figure acquisitions, stared down investors across boardroom tables without flinching. He had stood at the altar 7 years ago, and promised this woman in front of 200 people that he would never let her face anything alone. He stood in the lobby of the Hargrove Grand and could not make his legs move. 7 months earlier, Rebecca had been gone by the time he came home from the airport. He'd been in Atlanta for 3 days. A site acquisition that kept pushing back. Meetings that bled into dinners that bled into early morning calls. He'd texted her Tuesday night, gotten a short reply. Wednesday he'd called and it rang twice and went to voicemail, which wasn't unusual when she was working late at the nonprofit where she managed community outreach. Thursday morning he'd sent a message saying his flight landed at 6 and asking if she wanted him to pick up dinner. She never replied. He thought she was angry. There had been tension. A particular kind of slow-building tension that had been gathering in their house for almost 2 years. Since his mother, Constance Morrow, had moved into the guest suite after his father's death. Constance Morrow was a woman who had strong opinions about everything, and the absolute conviction that sharing those opinions was an act of generosity. She had opinions about how Rebecca kept the house, about how Rebecca dressed for family dinners, about whether Rebecca's work at the nonprofit was a real career or something she did to feel useful. Elliot had told himself his mother was grieving. He told himself Rebecca was strong enough to handle it. He told himself things would settle. He had been wrong about all 3. When he came home Thursday evening and found the house empty and a note on the kitchen counter. Just 3 lines, Rebecca's careful handwriting. He read it twice before he let himself understand what it said. I need you to know that I love you. I need you to know that I tried. I can't stay in a house where I am made to feel like I don't belong. I hope one day you understand why I had to go. No address, no phone. When he called her cell, it went straight to a recording, saying the number was no longer in service. She had planned this. That was the part that stopped his breathing. She had planned this carefully and quietly, the way she did everything, with patience, with precision, with a kind of heartbreak she had clearly been carrying alone for a long time. Constance was in the kitchen when Elliot came downstairs from checking every room. She was making tea. She looked at him over the rim of her reading glasses and said, I suppose she finally made her decision. The way she said it, flat, unsurprised, almost relieved, told him everything he should have understood a long time ago. What did you say to her? He said. It wasn't a question. I said what needed to be said. Constance set down her mug. Elliot, that woman has been pulling you away from this family since the day she married you. I simply made clear that. Get out. She blinked. Excuse me? I need you to go stay at Aunt Margot's, tonight. His voice was very quiet. I will call you when I am ready to talk about this. Right now I need you to leave. Constance Morrow left that night with her chin up and her jaw tight, and Elliot spent the next 7 months looking for his wife. He hired a private investigator named Carl Weiss who was methodical and discreet and found very little. Rebecca had withdrawn savings from a personal account, not their joint accounts, her own, 3 weeks before she left. Small amounts over time, so gradual he hadn't noticed. She had not used a credit card, not filed any forwarding address, not reached out to any of her friends that Weiss could locate. Her closest friend, a woman named Patrice, said she hadn't heard from Rebecca in months, and that the last time they'd spoken, Rebecca had seemed exhausted in a way Patrice hadn't known how to name. She said she felt like a guest in her own life, Patrice told Weiss. She said she'd been trying to make herself fit somewhere she wasn't wanted. Elliot read that in the report and had to put it down and walk outside and stand in the cold for a while. He kept working because stopping felt like giving up on more than just the business. He went through the motions of his days, meetings, calls, site visits, the mechanical routine of a man who understood that forward motion was the only thing keeping him from collapsing inward. At night he sat in the house that was too quiet, and went through every conversation of the past 2 years, and catalogued every moment he had let slide. Every dinner where Constance had said something cutting, and he had changed the subject. Every time Rebecca had started to tell him something and he had been distracted, checking his phone, half present. Every time she had gone quiet in that specific way and he had told himself she was fine. She had not been fine, he had not been paying attention. The private investigator called him on a Wednesday morning in March with 3 words. I found something. Weiss had traced a lead through a woman at a church in Covington, Kentucky, who ran a housing assistance program. Rebecca had briefly connected with the program under her maiden name, Rebecca Hale. She hadn't stayed long, but from there Weiss had worked a thread, a transitional housing unit, a part-time cashier job at a grocery in Hyde Park, and then, 6 weeks ago, a position as a housekeeping staff member at a downtown Cincinnati hotel, the Hargrove Grand. Elliot had a meeting there that afternoon. He'd scheduled it 2 weeks ago to discuss a commercial property adjacent to the hotel that the owners were considering selling. He had not known. The coincidence felt less like coincidence, and more like the universe deciding it was time. He told his assistant to push the meeting back an hour. He drove downtown. He parked in the hotel garage, sat in his car for 11 minutes, and then walked into the lobby. He almost didn't recognize her. And then she turned her head and he saw her profile. She saw him at the same moment his briefcase hit the floor. Rebecca Hale. She was going by her maiden name, he realized. Another layer of careful distance. Went very still. The sponge in her hand stopped moving. She didn't stand up immediately, she just looked at him, and for a moment her face was entirely unreadable. Then she stood. Slowly. She pulled off one rubber glove, then the other, folded them together with the kind of practiced calm of someone who has learned that the physical motions of ordinary tasks can hold you together when nothing else will. She was thinner. There were shadows under her eyes that hadn't been there before. She was wearing a uniform 2 sizes too large and her hair was pulled back severely, and she looked, he thought, like someone who had been surviving. Not living, surviving by sheer force of will. She looked, underneath all of it, like his wife. Elliot, she said. Her voice was steady. That was the thing about Rebecca. She was always steadier than him when it counted. Rebecca. He couldn't think of anything else to say. 7 months of rehearsed explanations, apologies he'd practiced in the dark, all of it gone. He said her name and then he just looked at her. One of the hotel managers, a young man in a navy jacket, had appeared at the edge of the lobby. Elliot turned to him briefly. Is there somewhere private we can speak? A break room, an office, anywhere. The manager looked between the two of them, picked up on something in the room and nodded. Follow me. The break room was small and fluorescent lit, with a row of lockers along one wall and a folding table with plastic chairs. There was a coffee maker on a counter and a poster on the wall about fire safety. It was, Elliot thought, about as far from their house in Indian Hill as a room could get. Rebecca sat down across from him and folded her hands on the table. She didn't look away. That was one of the things he had always loved about her. She never looked away from hard things. How did you find me? She asked. I've been looking for 7 months. He paused. I hired someone. Something moved across her face at that. Not surprise exactly. Something more like cautious calculation, the way she always looked when she was deciding how much to trust. Why? She asked. It was such a simple question. He had expected anger or tears or more of that terrible steadiness. He hadn't expected why. Because you're my wife, he said. Because I should have come after you the moment I found that note, and instead I spent a month convinced you just needed space, and by the time I understood what was actually happening, you were gone. He stopped. Because I failed you. I know that I failed you, and I need you to know that I know it. Rebecca looked at him for a long moment. Your mother told me, she said quietly, that you had asked her to speak to me, that the two of you had discussed that I was making things difficult, that she was delivering a message from you when she told me I needed to decide whether I was serious about this marriage or not. Elliot felt the air leave the room. That's not true, he said. I know. Her voice didn't waver. I know that now. I didn't know it then. Or maybe I did know it, and I was too tired to fight anymore. She looked down at her folded hands. I had been fighting for 2 years, Elliot, defending my place in my own home, explaining why I deserved to be there, waiting for you to notice how tired I was. She looked back up at him. And you didn't notice, he said. I didn't. There it was. No defense, no explanation, no pivot to his own pain. Just the plain truth of it, which was the least she was owed. Rebecca's jaw tightened. She was holding something. He could see it, the way her hands pressed together. I found out I was pregnant 3 weeks before I left, she said. The room tilted. I was going to tell you, she said quickly. I was trying to figure out how. And then your mother, and I thought, I cannot bring a child into this. I cannot have a baby in a house where I am made to feel like a problem, where her father doesn't see what's happening. She exhaled slowly. So I left. I left to protect the baby, and I left because I didn't know how else to make you understand. Elliot stared at her. His mind was doing the arithmetic. 3 weeks before she left, that was 7 months ago, which meant, Rebecca, his voice came out strange. Is the baby 14 weeks along? She said. Everything is healthy. I've been going to a clinic. He put his face in his hands. He sat like that for a moment, and he did not cry exactly. But something happened in his chest that felt like the specific kind of breaking that is also a beginning. When he looked up, she was watching him with an expression he recognized. That careful, guarded look of someone who wants desperately to believe something is real and cannot afford to be wrong. Tell me what you need, he said. Tell me exactly what you need to feel safe. I will do it. Whatever it is. Your mother cannot be in our home, Rebecca said. There was no softness in it, no apology. Just the simple boundary of a woman who had learned what she was worth by having to remind herself of it every day for 7 months. She won't be, he said. She never should have been. That's on me. The way I handled that, the way I let her stay, the way I told myself you were fine when I wasn't looking closely enough to know. That's on me. Rebecca looked at him. I need more than that, she said. I need you to understand that this cannot happen again. That I cannot be the person who keeps trying to explain why she deserves to be loved in her own home. I did that for 2 years, Elliot. I cannot do it again. You won't have to, he said. That's not a promise I'm making because I want you back. That's a promise I'm making because I understand now what I was asking you to live with, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never feel like that again. If you'll let me try. The fluorescent lights hummed above them. Rebecca unclenched her hands slowly. She looked at the table, then at the wall, then at him. There was so much moving across her face, exhaustion and grief, and something that might have been the first fragile edge of hope. I'm not coming home tonight, she said. Okay, I'm not coming home until I know what you've actually done, not what you've promised. What you've done. She met his eyes. I want to hear that you've spoken to Constance. I want to know that the arrangement has actually changed. I need time to think about what I want. You can have as much time as you need, he said. I'm not going anywhere. She stood and gathered her gloves from the table, and for a moment she was just standing there in her gray uniform in the fluorescent light of a hotel break room. And she looked so tired, and she looked so strong. And she looked so much like the woman he had stood next to at an altar 7 years ago and made a promise to. I get off at 4, she said. He blinked. If you want to talk more, she said. I get off at 4. He called Constance from the hotel parking garage. He had been composing this conversation for months in his head. Sometimes angry, sometimes cold, sometimes measured. But when she picked up and said his name in that familiar tone of mild concern she always used, like she was perpetually prepared to be slightly disappointed, he felt something clarify inside him. I need to tell you several things, he said, and I need you to listen without interrupting. Elliot, without interrupting, he said again very quietly. Silence. I found Rebecca. She's been in Cincinnati the entire time, working to support herself because she didn't feel safe in our home. She is pregnant. She has been carrying that alone for 7 months because of the environment we created, because of the things you said to her, and because I wasn't paying attention. He paused. You told her that I had asked you to speak to her, that we had discussed her together. That you were delivering a message from me. A beat. I was trying to help, Constance said. You lied to her, he let that sit. You told my wife that her husband had sent his mother to deliver an ultimatum. You drove her out of her own home, and I allowed the conditions that made that possible by never making clear to you that Rebecca was not your problem to manage. That was my failure, and I own it. But what you did was deliberate, and it caused real harm, and I need you to understand that. I was protecting this family. You were protecting your position in this family, he said. Those are not the same thing. Another pause. Rebecca will be coming home. When she's ready, on her timeline. The guest suite needs to be cleared out before that happens. I'll arrange for your things to be moved to Margot's. I'm sorry it took me this long to have this conversation. I should have had it 2 years ago. Constance said nothing for a long moment. You're choosing her over your own mother, she said finally. I'm choosing my wife, he said. I'm choosing my child. I'm choosing the marriage I made a vow in. He stopped. I love you, Mom. But love doesn't give you permission to do what you did. Not to her, not in our home. He hung up. He sat in the parking garage for a few minutes, in the particular silence that follows a conversation that has been a long time coming. His hands were not shaking. He had expected them to shake. He thought about Rebecca at 4 o'clock, walking out of the service entrance of the Hargrove Grand in her gray uniform, with her hair pulled back, squinting into the afternoon light. He thought about 7 months of her being 30 miles away, and him not knowing. He thought about her at a free clinic, hearing a heartbeat for the first time alone. He had a lot to make up for, he understood that. But he also understood, for the first time in a long time, exactly what he was fighting for, and exactly what he had nearly let go of without ever realizing it was slipping through his hands. At 4:15 he was sitting on a bench outside the hotel's service entrance when the door opened and Rebecca came out. Still in her uniform, her bag over one shoulder, She stopped when she saw him. He stood. I called her, he said. I told her about the guest suite. I told her what she'd done and why it couldn't be undone by an apology. I told her Rebecca was coming home. She looked at him for a long time. You said Rebecca, she said. Not my wife, not she. I said your name, he said, because you're a person, not a category. I should have remembered that more often. Something shifted in her face, just slightly. A softening at the corner of her mouth. I'm not moving back next week, she said. I know. I want to see a counselor, both of us. Already looked up 3 names, he said. They're in my phone. You can choose. She looked down at the sidewalk, and when she looked back up, her eyes were bright in a way that was almost not crying. Elliot, she said. Yeah, I'm really tired, she said. He took a step toward her. Slowly, giving her every chance to step back. She didn't. When he put his arms around her, she stood there for a second like someone who has forgotten what it feels like to be held by someone who actually means it, and then she exhaled. A long, shuddering breath. 7 months of survival compressed into a single sound, and leaned into him. They stood on the sidewalk outside the service entrance of the Hargrove Grand, and the afternoon traffic moved past them, and the city kept doing what cities do, indifferent and relentless. He held his wife. He held the beginning of his child. He held everything he had nearly let go of by looking away at the wrong time. He did not let go. There were no dramatic declarations in the weeks that followed, no grand gestures, no tearful reunion scenes played out in front of an audience that had never been who they were. Rebecca moved into a short-term apartment while they worked through the early sessions with the counselor, a woman named Dr. Anita Ferris, who had a talent for asking the exact question neither of them wanted to answer and waiting patiently until they did. Elliot drove Rebecca to appointments. He texted her every day, not with pressure or pleading, but with the small ordinary things he had stopped sharing without noticing. A funny thing that happened at a site meeting. A question about what kind of paint she wanted in the nursery, a photo of the oak tree in their backyard beginning to bud. She replied. Not always immediately, but she replied. Constance called twice in the first 3 weeks. Elliot answered both times, kept the conversation short, and said the same thing both times. He was glad she'd called, and when she was ready to genuinely apologize to Rebecca, not explain, not contextualize, not defend, he hoped she would reach out. Until then, he needed her to give them space. The second call, Constance cried. He let her. He did not change what he'd said. 7 weeks after the parking garage, Rebecca came home. He had cleared out the guest suite and repainted it in the pale yellow she had picked from a photo she texted him in week 3. He had moved the furniture so the room got the afternoon light. He had put nothing in there that was his mother's. She stood in the doorway of the nursery and didn't say anything for a while. Too much yellow, he asked. No, she said. It's right. She turned and looked at him, really looked at him the way she had when he'd been sitting on that bench outside the service entrance, when she'd been deciding whether to trust that something had actually changed. I'm still going to need time, she said. I know, he said. I'm still going to need you to show me, she said. Not tell me, show me. No. He said again. I'm ready to show you. She nodded once, the way she did when she had made a decision and was committed to it, and then she walked past him and down the hallway and began, slowly, carefully, on her own terms, the process of coming home.